The only basis for blessing is Christ and the fact that He bore our curse on the cross. If we attempt to add anything, even if it is found in God's holy law, such as circumcision, you are fallen from. That's what He's saying. He's saying, come only on the basis of Christ.
Crucified, laid behind the stone, you lived to die, rejected and alone, like a rose trampled on the ground. You took the fall, and you thought of me above us, and crucified, crucified, laid behind the stone, you lived to die, rejected and alone, like a rose trampled on the ground. You took the fall, and you thought of me above all. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised this life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised this life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised this life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised this life up from the dead. Everybody, oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised his life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised his life up from the dead. Jesus, oh Jesus.
Galatians 3:10, for as many as are of the works of the law are under the curse. This is New King James translation. Other translations will put it more clearly. For all who rely, some translations will say, ESV, for all who rely on works of the law, that is on doing good and pleasing God and getting blessing, for all who rely on that method, on that way, are under the curse. As it is written, Paul says, cursed is everyone who does not continue in all things. Notice the word all, which are written in the book of the law to do them. So he says, if you rely on works of the law, if you rely on doing good and getting blessing from God, then you are under a curse. Why? You cannot do all good. You have disobeyed, and therefore you come under the curse. The law itself says you are under a curse. And then go to verse 13. In that context only, he presents Christ and the cross. He says, Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law, having become a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree, so that the blessing of Abraham might come upon the Gentiles in Christ Jesus. So he's saying, if you're relying on works of the law, you are cursed. How to get out of this curse? Well, believe in Christ, who has redeemed you from that curse of the law and who has become a curse so that you can receive. So that is what I will say to that group. Simply believe that Jesus bore your curse on the cross, and you will receive blessing. That is the way to blessing, not your good works, not your obedience to what even is found here. See, okay, but let's come back to the majority. I don't think most of us are in that group, okay? See, it's easy to preach a message like this to unbelievers. I recently spoke to students I told them, I presented the gospel like this. I said, will good happen to you if you do good? If you do good, will good happen to you? No. If you believe in Jesus, only truly good things will happen only if you believe in Jesus, not if you go out and do good. And to my astonishment, they accepted, most of them. I gave an altar call, a lot of students lifted up their hands. I myself was shocked a little bit. I was like, they actually believed what I said, But it's also easy, I think, so it's easy to say this to unbelievers. It's also easy to go to some churches where they have not been taught about blessing and grace and how to receive blessing and things like that, right? And go teach them things like this. They will be benefited from it easily. But it's more difficult to come here, stand in this pulpit, right? From which you have heard about the blessing of Abraham, about living by grace. You heard all that. Everything I told you so far is not new. Nothing I said so far is, you may say, brother, I agree with everything you're saying, but this is nothing new to me. Pastor Sam has already said it all. Okay? Now that is how most of us are, even myself included. Okay? Now how does this teaching affect us then? See, we are thinking like this. Let me try to examine our thinking. All what I said is correct. If you rely on works, you will come under a curse. If you go to God on the basis of your works, you cannot be blessed. You are not blessed by your works, you are blessed by His grace. You may say, I am living by grace, not by my works. I've already been taught this. So our problem is not that we are believing only in our works to get blessing. No, we are believing in grace only. Then what is our problem? Do we have a problem? Yes, we certainly do have a problem. Here's the problem. We believe mostly in grace, and we come and add a little bit of our works to the side. What is our problem? Yes, we believe in grace. It's all God's grace. Well, mostly, a little bit, I'm completing the grace, just a little bit on the end, attach my. You may say, no, I'm not adding works to grace. Well, all of us are guilty of doing it to some extent. You can see this when you sin. When you commit a sin, what enters your mind? Right? I've committed a sin. Oh, now, God is not pleased with me. And now I don't deserve His blessing anymore. Why? I've gone directly against His commandment. And I have sinned against Him. I've rebelled against Him, whatever it is. Now I don't deserve to receive blessing anymore from. God is willing to bless me. God is gracious and all that. But I don't deserve to receive it because I have sinned. So let me just be like this. If you have any sort of thinking like that, which I believe all of us do to some extent, okay? Some of us are better than others in this matter, but all of us to some extent we believe that when we sin, suddenly we are unqualified before God for blessing, right? Yes, God's grace is there, the cross is there, Jesus bore our curse for us, we don't have to bear curse, blessing is ours, God has done everything, God is ready to give us blessing, but we have messed up. We have messed up. And therefore, we don't, what we think is His grace is there, His grace is 90%, but I need to obey His commandments. Only then the blessing will come. If I stop obeying His commandments, the blessing will be cut off. See, what that shows us is, we are adding works to grace. If you say, no, I'm not adding works to grace, please forgive me, the rest of this message you may not benefit from. And I won't be upset if you get up and leave either. So, my point is, every one of us are guilty of this matter to a certain extent. To some extent, all of us are guilty of adding works to grace. Some of us will add just 1%, some of us 10%, some of us 20%, but all of us, even after hearing so much teaching, why? Because there is something in the heart of man which says, I want to contribute something. What God? Let me give it, It's very hard for us to, stay still and say, God, you do it all, I'll just receive it. No, let me do something, God. Right? There is a pride down deep in the heart of man to want to earn blessing from God. You see? So what? So we are all guilty of adding works to grace. But the problem is, grace and works don't mix. They don't. Grace plus works, it's not a good combination at all. They don't go together. Oil and water don't mix, right? Oil stays on top, water stays at the bottom. They don't mix. But at least oil and water, nothing bad happens. You add, you realize it doesn't mix, and you go about, doing something else. But if you're in the chemistry lab and you don't know what to mix with what, if you mix two chemicals, without knowing, you may end up with an explosion, right? You have to be careful when you're mixing two things. Some will bring you disastrous consequences. You may burn your hands. It's even possible to die from such accidents. Point is, you should not mix what doesn't mix. It's a deadly combination. Grace plus works is deadly. I'll give you an example. Galatians 5 verse 3. And I testify again to every man who becomes circumcised that he is a debtor to keep the whole law. Now the problem with the Galatian church, I told you they were relying on works of the law. Particularly for them, the main work was circumcision. Okay? So they looked at all the 5 books and they said, well, what is the most important commandment of all? And they said, circumcision. Okay, so circumcision, if you do circumcision, God will accept you, God will consider you worthy, He will bless you, you will get all the blessings from God. If you don't do circumcision, you will not be accepted by God, you will not be eligible for blessing. So that was the one thing they were holding on to. Okay? And so Paul is telling them, if every man who becomes circumcised, he is a debtor to keep the whole law. He's saying it's not enough if you just catch this one thing and hang on to that. No. If you're ready to do this one, if you are saying, I will do this one thing and thus become eligible for blessing before God, then you must be ready to do the whole law. That's what he says. You are a debtor to do the keep the whole law. Look at verse 4. You have become estranged from Christ, you who attempt to be justified by law. Justified means considered to be righteous. Okay? That is, if you attempt to be, that is, if you want God to consider you righteous because you have gone and done circumcision, right? That means you are severed from Christ. You are cut off from Christ. You are estranged from Christ. You have fallen from grace. Now, the problem with the Galatians was it was not that they were believing only in works. Okay? You can go and read in the book of Galatians. Paul never says, oh, you don't believe in Christ at all. He doesn't say like that. No, their problem was they were believing in grace. Okay? But they were adding works to it. They were saying, yes, grace is there. It's all grace. Jesus died on the cross. He bore everything, sin, curse, and everything. But even if you believe in that, if you don't get circumcised, you'll receive nothing. Okay, that was their problem. Their problem was grace plus circumcision. Okay? And so Paul is telling them, if you do that type of thing, grace plus circumcision, then you are separated from Christ. You have fallen from, as though they've already fallen, he's saying. If you are already like that, that means you have already fallen from. What I'm trying to show you is you cannot add anything to grace, you see. Grace. What do I mean by grace? Nowadays everybody's saying grace, grace, grace. By God's grace, by God's grace, by God's grace, you see it everywhere, I begin to wonder what grace they're talking about, What is this grace? I'm talking about the grace that revealed itself on the cross, okay? Not some other grace. No. Grace that revealed itself on the cross. The grace that did what happened on the cross. I'm talking about that grace. If you add anything to that grace, if you were trying to add anything to what Christ did for you on the cross, the only basis for blessing is Christ and the fact that He bore our curse on the cross. If we attempt to add anything, even if it is found in God's holy law, such as circumcision, you are fallen from. That's what He's saying. He's saying, come only on the basis of Christ. Christ alone, grace alone. Add nothing else. See, we are also guilty in some ways. I wouldn't say we are guilty in the same way Galatians are guilty. Paul just scolds them left and right. If you read the book of Galatians, it'll be quite shocking. This is Paul at his angriest. There were worse. There were some. In the Bible, there are good churches and there are bad churches. I don't know if you know this. There are good people and bad people all in the Bible. And church is also same way. You have some good churches like the Philippian church, okay, and the Roman church. But you also have some bad churches like the Corinthian church. Corinthian church are all people living in utter sin and immorality, If there was a church today like that, we would not even consider it a church. We would think these fellows are the worst people on earth, let alone Christians, let alone believers. They are not any church. But Paul writes very graciously to them even in Corinthians. But even worse than the Corinthians, he blasts the Galatians. You go read the Galatians. He's kinder to the Corinthians than the Galatians. Corinthians were living an immoral lifestyle. He's strict with them, he scolds them a little bit. But Galatians is another level. Their problem is not that they're living an immoral life. Their problem is they're trying to add something to God's grace. That is, they're trying to add something to Christ's perfect work on the cross. They're saying that's not enough. I have to add my little bit to it. And they're getting that little bit from the Bible itself, you see. See, we are also guilty to a certain extent of the same type of, I would say, sin. Some churches, the whole Bible is there, but very rarely do we try to, do all the commandments or anything. Usually we pick one or two or three and we hang on that. This is the big thing. Some churches say, well, if you take off this, then God will accept you. Some churches say, if you put on this, God will accept you. If you shorten this, God will. Some other churches say, well, if you, pay your membership fees, if you give the tithe, God will accept you. Some other churches say they catch on to something else, So they go through the Bible and just find one commandment somewhere and they say, well, if you go to church on Saturday, then God will accept you, right? So they latch on to something, just one or two. They don't focus on all. Nobody focuses on all the commandments. They just focus on, just get one or two things and hang on to that and say, if you do this, God will bless you. Sometimes I'll tell you how I do this sometimes. I think if I do the job that's given to me well, then God will bless me. So if God has called me to ministry, if He's called me to be a preacher, if I prepare well for my message, spend time, pray, meditate, do all that hard work, then God will bless me. If I preach a good sermon, then God will bless me and my family. But the problem is it's exact opposite. Only if He blesses me, I can prepare properly, I can preach properly. You know what I mean? We reverse the order. Some of you may be parents and you may be thinking, well, if I only am a good parent to my children, then God will bless me. If I meet all my children's needs, then God will. But only if He blesses, you can meet their needs, you can be a good parent. Your good works don't qualify you for blessing. In fact, your blessing only leads you to do good works. I'm not against good works, my friend. I never said good works are unnecessary to be a Christian or something like that. I never said, all I'm saying is, God doesn't bless us on the basis of our good works. That much I will say surely. God does not bless us on the basis of because on the basis of our good works, He only has to curse us, not bless us. You know what I mean? I just showed you that. Because He demands perfect obedience. So He does not bless us on the basis of good works. Good works are necessary, though, for a Christian in other ways, you see. Good works are one of the most important proofs that a person is a real, true believer. Good works, I would say, are one of the most important proofs that the blessing is really working in this person's life. Good works are very important because we need to fulfill the plan and purpose that God has for us, right? Bring glory for God's name. Good works are important for all those things, but they do not qualify us to receive blessing from God. I'll tell you that now. That's our position here in this church. Good works don't qualify us. God's grace, His grace revealed on the cross only qualifies. In other words, because Jesus bore the curse, I receive blessing, nothing else. Don't mix works with grace. We're hanging on to something, my friend. Let go of it. Maybe a student may think, if I'm only a good student, proper student, if I study well, pass my exams, get a good marks, then God will bless me. Opposite, once again. Only if He blesses you, you'll be able to study well, be able to get good marks. It's just the opposite, right? Good works don't qualify your blessing. Your blessing only leads to more good works. Grace and works don't mix. One more verse, Romans 11:6. And if by grace, then it is no longer of works. He's saying, if it is by grace, then it is no longer by works. Otherwise, grace is no longer grace. But if it is of works, it is no longer grace. Otherwise, work is no longer. He's saying these things you cannot mix. If it's by grace, then it's by grace. If it's by works, it's by works. Don't try to say it's by grace and a little bit of my works. No. Leave grace to be grace. Leave it alone, my friend. Why go and meddle with it? Why go and mess it up and have it explode in your face? Severed from Christ, fallen from grace. Pretty scary words, okay? From the Apostle Paul. His work, that is only grace. That is His work, Christ's work, His life, His death, His resurrection. And my works, don't mix it. They're not meant to be mixed. Don't add even a little bit to God's grace. Because the little bit that you add will mess you up. Right? His grace is not going to change. It's going to be there. Everything is fine. But the little bit that you add will end up ruining your life, you see. It will end up depriving you of the blessing that is rightfully yours in and through Christ Jesus. You may say, well, I believe it's all God's grace. Just a little bit, I just believe that I have to obey, My obedience just counts just a little bit. Right? Well, problem is you will fall sooner or later. Okay, maybe you're obeying now, okay? But it's going to be very soon before you will. Today I showed you have to obey perfectly. So now that will be in your head. So the next time you fall, you will remember that. I've fallen, now I deserve the curse of God, not the blessing of God. You see? So when that happens, what happens? We think, God's grace is there, but now because I have fallen, I don't deserve it, you see? So don't ever try to mix the two together. It won't work. It's not meant to work. Then what is the solution? Well, I think I've covered everybody now. I spoke to one group only earlier. Now I think we've got everybody covered. Now what is the solution for all of us? For group one and for those who believe in works alone, and for those of us who like mixing a little bit of works to God's glorious grace. What is the solution? The solution is the cross only. Nothing new. There's nothing, some people are expecting to hear something new, something stimulating, new, tantalizing, new revelations. No, there's nothing new under the sun, somebody said. There is nothing new apart from the Bible. You see, everything is here, and the Bible points to the cross only as the solution. It's the solution for those who believe in works alone. It's the solution for those who believe in grace plus works. Once again, look to the cross. That's the solution. When I say cross, some people think cross is for baby believers. Right? When you're talking to unbelievers or baby believers, you can talk about the cross. But for some experienced, grown-up, well-fed believers, we are giving them higher doctrines and whatnot, And so they go high, and they leave the cross way down in that corner somewhere. The next time they bring the crosses during communion, Say, okay, now let's all think about the cross, how he suffered and and then communion is over. Okay, let's take the cross and just put it back a little bit over there. We'll come back to it. Thank God, at least Jesus said, at least observe this as often as you can. I know you will forget it. You won't think much of it. You won't think that's worthy of preaching. You won't think that's great preaching material. Who thinks of the cross as great preaching material? Let's look at the cross once more. That's what I'm saying. That is the solution for all of us. Okay? On what basis do we receive blessing? Not on the basis of our works. Not even a little bit on the basis of our works. Not even adding a little bit to God's grace. Pure grace. That is how we receive blessing. What do I mean? Jesus bore our curse. Therefore we receive. It's as simple as that. Jesus bore our. I can't please God by my good works the way He wants to be pleased. I can't give Him perfect obedience. In fact, I disobeyed. I did not give Him good works. I gave Him bad works, horrible works. And those works took Jesus to the cross. And because of those works, curse went on Jesus. Because of my sin, curse went on Jesus. And He bore my curse. Now I don't have to bear it anymore. I am eligible for blessing because Jesus took away my.
In your presence, there is fullness of joy. At your right hand, there are pleasures evermore. You surround us with your favor, O Lord. The earth is full of your goodness. The earth is filled with your love. In your presence, there is fullness of joy. At your right hand, there are pleasures evermore. You surround us with your favor, O Lord. The earth is full of your goodness. The earth is filled with your exceedingly abundantly, far above all we could ever ask or think. Exceedingly abundantly, you give us all things to enjoy. In your presence, there is fullness of joy. At your right hand, there are pleasures evermore. Surround us with your favor, O Lord. The earth is full of your goodness. The earth is filled in your presence.